On the island of Cyprus stands the Church of St. Lazarus. According to Wikipedia, the church is built over the grave of Lazarus, well, that is to say, his second grave. The picture shows an ornate brass candelabra over an altar and statues all around. But as beautiful and as fascinating as that cathedral may be, the more interesting is what's below it. Descend a stone staircase to a crypt where you'll find an empty stone coffin, one that contained the bones of Lazarus. But this time, according to historians, Lazarus' grave was emptied because they took those bones to Constantinople in 890 in order to be enshrined. But in 1204, the Franks invaded Constantinople, and as part of the spoils of war, they took the very bones of Lazarus with them back to France. From there, we don't know what happened to it. It seems that the body of Lazarus just can't be entombed. But as interesting as those events are, it was the first grave emptying that is by far the most amazing. Today's story in John 11 happens in the village of Bethany. It's the place where Lazarus and Martha and Mary live. One day word is sent to Jesus that his friend Lazarus is gravely ill. To come quickly, I guess. But Jesus doesn't do that. The disciples probably think it's wise because only a couple of days before the religious authorities had been out hunting for him, and well, to stay low would be safe. But that's not the reason why Jesus doesn't go to his friend Lazarus. He will say to his disciples, Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad that I wasn't there, because this will give you another opportunity to believe in me. Here's how John tells the story. Well, a couple of days later, Jesus does decide it's time to go to see Lazarus. Thomas isn't so sure, and yet he says, well, if he's going to go, then fellas, let's go and die with him, because this is a suicide mission. And by the time they get there, Lazarus has been in the tomb for about 4 days. The sisters hear that he's come. And it's Martha who gets up and decides to make her way to meet him partway. Perhaps because she's so angry, she wants to give him a piece of her mind right away. She starts off, if you had come right away, my brother might not have died. But even as she says that, she recognizes that Jesus is a man of God. And so she says, but even now I know that if you were to ask God for something, God would do it. Although it's probably not resurrection that she's got in mind. Jesus says to her, your brother will live. And she says, yes, I know. I've been taught since I was a little girl that we, along with everyone else, will rise on the day of resurrection. But it doesn't make this moment any easier to take. And then Jesus says to her, but I am the resurrection and the life. Those are words that we've heard at just about every funeral and Easter service. I am the resurrection and the life. They who believe on me, even though they die, shall live. And everyone who lives and believes on me shall never die. Do you believe this, Martha? There's no question that Jesus has deep emotions for what's going on. In our text, we have the shortest scripture verse in all the Bible. 2 words. Jesus wept. It's found in John 11:35. Short verse, but it speaks volumes because it tells us how Jesus is a man of emotion. A man who can enjoy a wedding, or he can sympathize with the man hanging on the cross beside him, or with indignation cleanse the temple, and at the grave of Lazarus cry. they that were there said, "See how he loved him." And this expression of love will make a tremendous impact upon the gospel writer John. For in his epistle, he will eventually write to them saying, "Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who is born of God knows God. But anyone who doesn't love doesn't know God, because God is love." Of all the emotions, the foremost feeling in the heart of God is love. Isn't that just the most wonderful truth? Let me say that again. The foremost feeling in the heart of God is love. God is not some hard-hearted, uncaring, distant deity. God doesn't look down from some lofty height with indifference. God is not detached from our feelings. As Hebrews 4 says, we have a great high priest who has gone to the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. And this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses. So let's come boldly to the throne of grace to find mercy and help in our time of need. God is not uncaring. Our cries and our prayers don't just bounce off the ceiling. God hears. But as our story shows, sometimes it seems that God has a funny way of showing it. I know if it had been me, I would have wanted to rush over to Lazarus and do my magic and heal him and make him well, and everything would go back to normal. Yeah, he knew what he was going to do, but that didn't make it any easier for Mary and Martha as they grieved the loss of their loved one. And even the bystanders at the grave said, "This man healed a man who was born blind. Couldn't he have done something to help Lazarus from dying?" And who of us hasn't asked those kinds of questions? Why, God? Is there something that I should have done? Or if only? But as deep and as baffling as those kinds of questions may be, it was indeed Martha's faith in the goodness of God that enabled her, despite her loss, to be able to say, "Yes, Lord, I believe in you." And it was a faith that was able to allow her to go back and to share that good news that Jesus had come with her sister. And that even though things from this point on were going to be different, it would be okay because God was with them. Or as another verse says, God works all things according to that perfect plan and will. And Paul says it's impossible for us to understand the mind and the will of God. And so when Jesus calls Lazarus out of the grave, it was to give us living proof of the love and the care of God. Lazarus is living proof that God can bring good out of an evil situation. Lazarus is living proof that even when God seems to be absent or distant or silent, God knows and cares. Lazarus is living proof that God has the ultimate power over sin and death, and is the proof that everyone who puts their faith and trust in him will never die, but will have everlasting life. And so I'm going to put all of my hope and my faith and my future in the one who said, "I am the resurrection and the life." Won't you? Amen.